A single mom risked everything to save a wounded stranger hiding from a violent biker gang. She thought it was over when he vanished at dawn. No name, no promise, just silence. But the next day, the sound of engines roared back down her empty road. Not for vengeance, but for something else. 200 bikers descended on her diner, and what happened next turned her dying business into a legend. The open sign flickered in the window of Rachel's diner, though most days it felt more like a silent plea than a promise. The building stood stubbornly on the edge of a forgotten highway, a fading memory in a town that had long since stopped growing. Paint peeled from the shutters. The cracked parking lot had more weeds than cars, and the diner's once polished counter had dulled from years of worry and worn-out rags. Inside, Rachel moved like clockwork, flipping pancakes with one hand, pouring coffee with the other. Her apron was faded, her eyes tired, but her posture remained upright, steady. She greeted every customer with a smile that didn't always reach her eyes. Most didn't notice. They were usually truckers passing through or tired travelers looking for a hot meal and a place to stretch their legs. They came and went, never stayed long, never left much behind but crumbs and coins. Behind the counter, near the cash register that barely rang anymore, sat a small notebook. Inside were scribbled numbers that never seemed to add up. Rent, utilities, food orders, insurance. Each page was a quiet reminder that the diner was slipping further away from the dream it once was. Rachel's daughter, Lily, was only 7, full of questions and energy. She colored in a corner booth most afternoons after school, her crayons spilling onto the vinyl seat. She had no idea how close the walls were to crumbling around her. Rachel worked hard to keep it that way, to shield her from the cold truth of overdue notices and quiet panic. "Mommy, can I help serve the pie today?" Lily would ask, beaming. "Of course, sweet pea," Rachel would reply, pushing her own worry deep down where it couldn't be heard. But at night, when the stools were empty and the coffee pot finally stopped hissing, Rachel would stand in the kitchen with her hands pressed against the sink, staring at the faucet as if the answers might come out with the drip. Some nights she cried. Other nights, she just stood there in silence. She had no family left to lean on, no partner, just the diner and Lily, both of whom needed more than she sometimes felt she had left to give. There were mornings when she stood in the doorway, keys in hand, wondering if she should just lock the door and not open it again. Let the world move on. Sell what was left, find a job in town, and finally exhale. But then Lily would skip in, lunchbox in hand, smiling like the world was still bright. "Think we'll get customers today?" she'd ask. Rachel would kneel down, brush the girl's hair back, and smile. "I think we might." And so, she kept going. She cooked. She cleaned. She smiled through every slow shift and counted every dollar like it might be her last. Not because she believed things would magically get better, but because giving up wasn't in her blood. Even as the world seemed to forget her little diner on the roadside, Rachel refused to forget the dream it stood for. Even if it was cracked, chipped, and tired. The sky had turned an ominous shade of gray long before the rain started. Thunder cracked low across the hills, and Rachel glanced up from the grill, instinctively checking the windows. The few cars that had passed earlier had long since disappeared down the highway, their headlights swallowed by the coming storm. Inside the diner, it was just her and Lily now. The girl was curled in the corner booth, dozing over a coloring book, crayons scattered across the table like confetti. Rachel wiped her hands on a towel, glanced at the clock. It was past closing time, but something in her gut told her to wait a little longer. She flipped the open sign to dim and kept the lights low, just enough to offer warmth if someone happened to pass through the storm. The wind howled. Rain lashed against the windows, tapping harder with every gust. Rachel poured herself a lukewarm cup of coffee and leaned against the counter, staring out at the emptiness. And then, bang! The front door burst open, the bell above it clanging violently. Rachel nearly dropped her cup. A man staggered inside, soaked and limping. His face was streaked with blood, one eye nearly swollen shut. His leather vest, torn and heavy with rain, clung to his frame. On the back, through the mud and darkness, Rachel could make out the unmistakable red and white patch. A winged skull. Hell's Angels. Her breath caught in her throat. Every instinct screamed to run, to shield her daughter, to call someone, anyone. But she didn't move. The man collapsed into a booth, breathing hard. His arm dangled limply, slick with blood. He didn't speak, just winced and gritted his teeth, trying to stay conscious. Rachel stood frozen behind the counter, heart racing. Her eyes darted to the booth where Lily slept, unaware of the chaos unfolding. She'd heard stories. Everyone had. Hell's Angels weren't the kind of people you wanted in your diner, let alone bleeding all over your seats. Yet there was something about the way he slumped forward, something that cut through the fear. He wasn't a threat in that moment. He was broken, bleeding, human. Rachel swallowed hard. She locked the front door. With shaking hands, she grabbed a clean towel and a first aid kit from beneath the register. She moved cautiously, every step deliberate, aware of the danger, but unable to walk away. As she reached his booth, the man looked up, blood streaked across his jaw. He didn't speak, just watched her with wary eyes. "You're going to be all right," she said quietly, more to herself than to him. "But I need you to sit still." She began cleaning the wound on his arm, cutting away fabric, pressing the towel to stop the bleeding. Her fingers trembled, but she didn't stop, not even when he winced, not even when her thoughts spiraled with questions she couldn't afford to ask. Outside, lightning split the sky in jagged silence. Inside, Rachel worked in stillness. She didn't know who he was. She didn't know what trouble might follow. But in that moment, she knew one thing for sure. No one deserved to bleed alone in a storm. The storm hadn't let up. Rain pelted the windows like 1,000 tiny fists, thunder rumbling low like a growl in the earth's chest. Inside the diner, the man in the torn leather vest lay half-conscious in the corner booth, his breathing heavy, one hand pressed to the blood-soaked towel Rachel had wrapped around his ribs. Rachel moved quickly, wiping up the trail of blood with a wet rag, heart pounding in her ears. She had just tossed the rag into the sink when she heard it, the unmistakable roar of engines outside. More than one. She rushed to the front window and peeked through the blinds. For motorcycles, sleek, black, chrome gleaming in the stormlight. Riders in dark rain-soaked cuts stepped off, every one of them broad-shouldered, grim-faced. The patches on their backs were different, not Hell's Angels. Another club. Rachel didn't know who they were, but it didn't matter. They were looking for someone. The leader stepped onto the porch and banged hard on the door with a gloved fist. "Hey, you in there," he shouted. "We just need a word." Rachel turned back to the man in the booth. His eyes were open now, alert, but he didn't move. He gave a slight shake of his head, a silent warning. A tiny voice broke the tension. "Mom!" Lily peeked from the kitchen doorway, rubbing her eyes. Rachel turned sharply. "Back room. Now," she whispered. "But, now, baby, please." Lily's eyes widened. She nodded and disappeared without another word. Another bang at the door. Rachel took a breath and wiped her hands on her apron. Her legs felt like water, but she stood tall and walked to the door. The biker at the front looked soaked and furious. His eyes scanned the interior behind her through the glass. His 3 companions stood just behind him, arms folded, faces unreadable. "We're looking for someone," the leader growled. "Guy in a leather cut. Got into something he shouldn't. Came this way." Rachel narrowed her eyes just enough to play the part. "Storm's been going for hours," she said. "No one's come through. Not tonight." The man stared at her, lips curling into a smirk. "You sure about that?" She gave a little shrug. "Just me and my daughter. This ain't exactly the Ritz." Another biker stepped forward. "Place smells like blood." Rachel didn't flinch. "Burned my hand earlier," she lied smoothly. "Hot grease. Happens when you're short-staffed." The first man stepped closer, tapping the glass with his knuckle. "Funny thing is, we saw tire tracks off the road. Could be someone turned off here." Rachel met his gaze. Her voice didn't shake. "Could be. You think he's here, you're welcome to call the cops. Otherwise, I'd like to close up now." The silence that followed stretched and twisted like a wire. The leader looked past her again, scanning the booths, the corners, the shadows. Finally, he snorted. "Not worth the trouble," he muttered. He turned, signaling to the others. They walked back to their bikes, slowly, reluctantly. One of them looked over his shoulder as he swung a leg over his ride. He didn't smile. Engines fired to life, coughing and growling in the storm. Rachel stood at the door, watching until their tail lights vanished into the mist. Only when the last rumble faded into the night did she let herself exhale. Her hands trembled. She turned the deadbolt, and only then did she allow herself to feel the fear that had been clawing at her throat. She leaned against the door, closing her eyes, and whispered, "God help me." The storm outside had quieted to a dull patter, but the silence inside the diner felt heavier than before. Rachel moved with quiet purpose, her mind still echoing with the sound of engines and threats. The biker, the one she'd risked everything to protect, lay slumped in the back booth, sweat beading on his brow, blood still oozing slowly beneath the towel she had pressed to his ribs. She returned with a steaming mug of black coffee in a small metal tray. On it were clean bandages, a fresh towel, and the last bit of antiseptic she had in her first aid kit. He watched her approach. His eyes were clearer now, still guarded, still fierce, but no longer wild. "You're lucky," she murmured, kneeling beside him. "Nothing looks broken. Just deep. Feels like hell," he muttered, then winced as she peeled back the soaked cloth. Rachel worked in silence, cleaning, wrapping, doing what she could with what little she had. Her hands moved carefully, her eyes focused, her breath slow and measured. She could feel him watching her. "You didn't have to do this," he said quietly. She glanced up. "Maybe not. Most wouldn't have." She nodded slightly, cutting the gauze and securing it. "Didn't feel right to let you bleed alone." He didn't say anything for a moment, just looked at her, as if trying to read something deeper. Rachel rose, handed him the coffee, and slid a blanket over his legs. "You'll be sore in the morning, but you'll live." He nodded once, slow. "You got guts." She half smiled. "I've got a daughter in the back room. Guts are kind of necessary." He chuckled, a low, raspy sound that faded as quickly as it came. Then he leaned back, eyes fluttering closed, the mug cradled against his chest. Rachel stood there for a long time, watching him breathe. She didn't know his name, didn't know what kind of war he'd come from. Only that he'd brought danger to her door, and somehow she hadn't turned him away. At some point, she returned to the kitchen, washed her hands, checked on Lily, who slept curled on the cot in the back storage room, blissfully unaware. Rachel kissed her forehead, tucked the blanket higher over her shoulders. Then she sat down at the counter and waited for the morning light to come. When it did, soft and gray, the man was already stirring. He pushed himself upright slowly, grimacing as he stood. Rachel walked over with another mug of coffee, fresh this time, and handed it to him without a word. He took it, sipped, and exhaled. "Thank you," he said. Rachel shrugged. "You were just a guy who needed help." He looked like he wanted to say more, but instead, he set the mug down and pulled on his jacket with a slow, painful motion. He didn't give a name, didn't ask for hers. He simply walked to the door, paused, and looked back. His eyes locked with hers. Then he gave a small nod, firm, respectful, and stepped out into the soft drizzle of morning. Rachel watched as he disappeared down the road, the mist swallowing him whole. She stood in the doorway for a long while, arms crossed, heart still unsure whether to feel afraid or relieved. He was gone. That chapter closed. Or so she thought. For now, all that remained was silence, a blood-stained towel in the trash, and a secret she would carry alone. The following afternoon, the skies had cleared, but the storm hadn't truly passed. Rachel stood behind the counter, scrubbing the same coffee pot for the third time, her mind drifting back to the night before, to the blood, the threat at her door, the quiet goodbye that still echoed through her bones. It felt like a dream, too strange and sharp to be real. But the fading red stain on the kitchen towel and the deep ache in her chest said otherwise. Lily sat at her usual booth, drawing with crayons, humming a tune. The normalcy of it was almost comforting. Then Rachel heard it, a sound low, deep, rolling across the earth like distant thunder. At first, she thought it was just a few motorcycles, maybe a small group riding through. But the rumble grew louder, deeper, multiplying. She walked to the front window and pulled the blinds. What she saw made her breath catch. They were coming up the highway like a wave, a sea of black leather, chrome glinting in the afternoon sun. Dozens upon dozens of motorcycles, riding tight and clean in formation, the roar of their engines shaking the ground beneath her feet. They didn't pass by. They turned into the gravel lot. Rachel stepped back, heart hammering. She counted quickly, then stopped trying. There were too many, easily 200 riders. Hell's Angels. Patches gleamed on every back, some red and white, others worn with age. Every man carried the same quiet intensity, serious, focused. No chaos, no shouting, just precision. She reached for Lily's hand without thinking. The bikes came to a synchronized stop, engines dying one after another like dominoes. Then came silence, heavy and waiting. Rachel's throat tightened. She didn't run, didn't hide. She stood at the center of the diner floor, hand clenched on a dish towel, back straight, eyes locked on the door. The bell chimed. The first man stepped in, tall, thick-bearded, eyes sharp but not unkind. He wore a jacket marked with road years and respect. His boots thudded gently on the floor as he stopped just inside. Rachel didn't speak. He smiled, not wide but genuine. "We heard what you did," he said. She blinked. He held up a hand, not to stop her, but to steady the moment. "You helped one of ours," he continued. "You didn't have to, but you did." He glanced around, then nodded once. "We don't forget things like that." Without another word, he turned and gestured. The rest began filing in, row after row of bikers, leather and denim filling every inch of the small diner. Booths were taken. Counter stools claimed. Some stood, some leaned against walls. And one by one, they called out orders. 2 cheeseburgers, fries, black coffee. 3 of the breakfast plates. Whole pie if you got it. Lily stared wide-eyed. Rachel squeezed her hand gently. The room buzzed with conversation, laughter, the scrape of chairs, but none of it felt dangerous. No threat, just presence, just gratitude. Rachel moved to the kitchen, still in disbelief. The storm had returned, but this time it didn't bring fear. It brought family. The diner had never been this alive. The clatter of forks and knives, the steady thrum of laughter, the low rumble of conversations and shared stories. It all vibrated through the walls like music Rachel hadn't heard in years. Every seat was full, booths packed shoulder to shoulder, counter stools lined with weathered faces and road-worn leather. The air smelled of sizzling bacon, brewed coffee, and something else, respect, pride, brotherhood. Rachel moved like a blur, not out of fear or habit, but pure adrenaline. Plates flew out of the kitchen, pies were sliced, coffee pots emptied and filled again. She barely had time to process what was happening, but her heart pounded not with anxiety. This time, it was disbelief. Awe. They were eating everything, even the dusty meatloaf special that hadn't been ordered in weeks. Pancakes at noon, cornbread at dinner, whole pies claimed before they even hit the display case. In the middle of it all, Lily wandered between booths, beaming. The bikers greeted her like she was royalty. One handed her a patch from his vest. Another taught her a secret handshake. A tall man with a gray beard and arms like tree trunks gently placed a pair of aviator sunglasses on her head. "For the new boss," he said with a grin. Rachel watched it all from the grill, her eyes glassy. As the crowd began to ease into post-meal conversation, one of the men stepped up to the counter. He was broad and quiet, his jacket heavy with patches and years. He laid a hand on the counter, gentle, deliberate. "You saved one of ours," he said. Rachel looked up, wiping her hands on her apron. "He made it back," the man continued. "Told us what happened. Told us what you did." She didn't know what to say. I couldn't let him die." He nodded slowly. "Most people would have let him bleed out or called the cops. You didn't. You took a risk, one that could have gone bad in 100 ways." She lowered her eyes, unsure how to respond. The man leaned forward slightly. "You stood up for one of ours. Now we stand with you." He slid something across the counter, a metal coin engraved with the angel's emblem. "This means something," he said. "If you ever need help, you show that. Anywhere, anytime, Rachel picked it up. It was heavier than it looked. Another biker whistled from the far booth and stood, lifting a glass of Coke. "To the lady with more guts than most men I know," he called. "To the one who stood when it counted." A round of cheers followed, echoing through the diner like thunder. As they finished one by one, they left their bills tucked under plates and stacks of cash beside them. 20s, 50s, hundreds. Some left rolls of bills, others envelopes. It wasn't payment. It was gratitude. One biker paused on his way out, glancing at Lily with a smile, then looking at Rachel. "No one touches you. Not this place. Not your little girl. Ever." He nodded once and stepped into the sunlight. Rachel stood still as the last engine roared to life. As the line of bikes rolled back onto the highway, her hands trembled, not with fear, but with the weight of something far greater. In one day, her world had changed. She wasn't just a diner owner anymore. She was family. Rachel stood in the doorway of her diner, her apron still dusted with flour, arms folded across her chest. The roar of engines faded down the highway like a retreating storm. 200 motorcycles, now nothing but a distant hum, had come and gone, but the weight of their presence lingered, heavy and electric in the air. Her heart was racing, but not with fear. This time, it beat with something unfamiliar. A rush of strength, a spark of hope. For the first time in years, Rachel felt seen. The next morning, the diner door opened at 6 a.m. sharp. She half expected the quiet, familiar emptiness. But it never came. By 6:15, a line had formed outside. By 7 o'clock, every booth was full. By 9 o'clock, she was calling her neighbor to help with dishes. Word had traveled fast, faster than she could have imagined. Truckers, road trippers, locals, bikers in all shades of leather and denim. They didn't come for the food, though they raved about the pancakes. They came to meet her. The single mom who stood up to a gang. The woman who risked everything to protect a stranger. The legend from the storm. Rachel could barely keep up. Orders flew in. Coffee never stopped pouring. Lily, now dubbed Little Boss, handed out menus like a pro, smiling shyly at the constant compliments and gifts, patches, pins, even a miniature leather vest from one of the biker crews. The register rang for the first time in weeks, constantly. By Thursday, Rachel paid off her overdue bills in full. By Friday, she signed the papers to fix the leaking roof that had troubled her all winter. And by Sunday, a new neon sign gleamed over the entrance. It read, "The Angel's Diner," bright red script outlined with soft white wings. A nod to the men who had filled her dining room. Yes, but also a tribute to the moment that changed everything. Inside, the cracked counter had been scrubbed spotless. The jukebox, long broken, now buzzed with life, playing country classics and rock ballads. The smell of fresh pie drifted from the kitchen. Laughter echoed. It was no longer a place fading quietly into dust. It was a haven. Some nights, Rachel caught herself standing behind the counter, just watching. Watching strangers become friends. Watching Lily thrive. Watching the life that had once felt so out of reach grow brighter with each sunrise. She still didn't know the name of the man she helped. She probably never would. But she knew this. She hadn't saved him for thanks. She'd done it because it was right. And the world had answered. Sometimes family finds you in the most unexpected places. All it takes is one act of courage. And the world rides back to say thank you. If this story touched your heart, like, share, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell for more powerful, soul-touching stories that restore faith in humanity.